My name is Casey Murphy, and I am ACT's Director of Programs and Events. I want to thank you for joining us today for ACT's second webinar this month entitled Providing Equity in TDM Outreach and Activities, sponsored by the Chesapeake, NorCal, and SEACT chapters and the DEI committee. Before we hear from our panelists this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during the webinar. If you have a question or if you have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer any questions as the webinar gets going. Second, we will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Please type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please note that when asking a question, please also identify who the question is for so we can make sure that we get that question directed to the right person. Finally, this session is being recorded and we will have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce and turn things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT currently has going on. David?
Thank you, Casey, and welcome back. I know I speak on behalf of all the staff that we're thrilled to have you back running our webinars for us. So you were greatly missed. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Today's webinar brings forward an important issue of equity in transportation. And as an industry, we're often criticized for focusing too heavily on the white-collar professional, individuals that often have a multitude of choices and resources available to them in planning and running their commutes, while ignoring the greater challenges of providing services to disadvantaged communities and non-traditional workers. The pandemic, though, has clearly presented to us that in order to achieve the goals of creating an equitable and efficient transportation system for all people, we as transportation demand management professionals must take on the charge to push forward new thinking and approaches for how best to deliver services that are accessible, affordable, and sustainable for all commuters. Webinars like today's are aimed at providing you with an important conversation starter, and we hope that you carry over the information and thoughts you hear back to your individual work and work within ACT chapters and councils. Let them percolate new ideas and approaches that can benefit your programs and services. I also want to thank the leadership and members of the SEACT chapter, Northern California chapter, Chesapeake chapter, and of course our DEI committee for working together to bring this topic forward. To the individuals joining us today that are not yet members of ACT, I welcome you and invite you to become a member of our community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth, and with many more valuable opportunities like today's webinar. After today's event, you'll receive a note from Elizabeth Denton, ACT's Membership Experience Manager, offering an opportunity to connect and learn more about the association. I hope to meet you soon as a member at a future event. Now I want to take a moment to update everyone on some of the news from ACT. Registration, hopefully you saw, registration is open for ACT's virtual TDM forum that's going to be held December 14th. The half-day event will bring together hundreds of TDM professionals from around the world and will feature a fabulous keynote address from Dr. Reagan Patterson, who will speak on the very relevant topic of creating equity in public transit. We'll recognize our 2021 class of 40 under 40 honorees. And of course, there'll be plenty of learning opportunities throughout the afternoon. You can register today at actweb.org. Registration is just $45 for members, and we're offering group discounts for sending 5, 10, or more people to the event. Time is also running out to submit your interest to serve on one of ACT's 7 national committees. These include diversity and inclusion, our finance, governance, membership, professional development, programs and events, and public policy. There's literally something for everyone. The committees provide members with the ability to dive deep into a specific aspect of ACT's work, where you can lend your expertise and use your skills to help push forward the various projects and activities within the organization. and of course, take on an important leadership role within the industry. So if you're looking for a way to contribute to ACT, this is a rewarding and valued role within the organization. It also earns you important recertification credits for all of you that have your TDM CP or are looking to earn your TDM CP credential, which hopefully you saw the announcement today. We've just announced the dates for the next exam window to be held in February and March. Lastly, just over a year ago, we launched Connect, ACT's online community. To celebrate our anniversary, we held a contest to encourage new signups into the platform. Today, I get to announce our winner. It's a drum roll, everyone. And the winner is Christy Strait of New River Valley Regional Commission, who I believe I did see on the list here. So it's rare that we actually have that, line up there. Elizabeth will be in touch with you with details. I want to thank everyone who's helped make Connect a success over the last 13 months. It's been great to see a continuous increase in the conversations and discussions that are taking place on that platform. Now it's on today's webinar, providing equity and TDM outreach and activities. To kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, David Sorrell, who's the president of the Northern California chapter, as well as the vice chair of the DE&I committee. David, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, David. So good morning, everyone from the West Coast. Good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. It is a very beautiful and rainy Thursday here in the Bay Area. I'd like to first and foremost welcome all of you to today's webinar on providing equity in terms of TDM outreach, as well as the activities that would be able to back up what we mean by, active participation in the process. What we found out over the last year and a half is that, because of the state-sponsored violence or the perception of therefore, it's important for us to recognize and understand the critical juncture and critical points of ourselves as practitioners in the industry and how that would actually translate down towards serving our communities more efficiently. And as a result, that we had created this task force at the start, or rather in mid-2020, and come up with recommendations on how do we best serve our communities, but also serve our communities within ourselves, meaning our families and the places where we work. As a result, around this time last year, the ACT board had passed a resolution establishing the DE&I committee. And all throughout 2021, we were able to kind of establish ourselves, but also be able to work on the necessary objectives in order for us to move forward as a profession, but also forward in regards to our personal daily approaches to transit and transit demand management. As a result, this is our first webinar. And as a result, I do want to thank the members of our DEI committee that have worked steadfast over the last year, as well as our task force members over the last year in order for us to get further faster together. I'm happy to announce the speakers in regards to talking about how do we best serve our communities well. We have Samantha Huff, who's our marketing manager with a background in digital and transitional marketing channels, as well as marketing strategy with Go DC Go. She manages the marketing communications for the employer, school, and community partners programs. Her goal is to raise awareness and increase participation in Go DC Go's programs through strategic planning, email, newsletters, content creation, and other innovative techniques. Also, we have Ken Bowden. Ken has worked for the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority since November of last year as the manager of commuter services. Prior to that, Ken has worked with the Northeast Transportation Connections from Denver, Colorado as the employer outreach manager for the Central 70 project. With support of CDOT, NETC was able to offer incentives for carpool formation, free or dramatically reduced transit passes for the RTD system in Denver, as well as a last mile shuttle connecting employers to the A-Line commuter rail system, as well as other employer organized local hire programs designed to help both reduce vehicle miles traveled, as well as providing a career-oriented work for community residents. Thirdly, we have Korea Johnston, my apologies. Korea manages the marketing and communications for Go DC Go's commuter residential hospitality programs. This includes everything from creative direction, webpage management, strategic planning, content creation for emails, blogs, and social media, and everything that falls in between. In other words, she helps the district commuters, residents, and visitors stay in the know. Last but not least, we have Monica Mallon. Monica Mallon is a transit advocate in Santa Clara County and founder of Turnout for Transit, which is a grassroots transit advocacy group in Santa Clara County, which is in the San Jose metro area. She advocates for the preservation as well as the expansion of transit service, both locally and regionally. So this is our panel for today, but most importantly, we'll get started with Ken.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can everybody, oops, I need to actually hit the share button. Can everybody see my screen?
You're good, Ken.
Yep.
All right. Excellent. So I want to give you just a brief overview before we get into this on the Central 70 project, where it was located, and the fact that the expansion of I-70 through these communities was going through communities that really never recovered from the initial build out of the interstate system back in the 50s and 60s. If you jump to 2016, CDOT, the community, and the city of Denver really worked together to develop a program to both train and give 20% of the jobs created by the Central 70 project to the communities that were being impacted by the construction. And everybody involved really recognized that there was a need for equity job creation within this area. And I think this is really important to know, because it's in this context that my executive director, Angie Malpiedi, developed a TDM program for the community. And it was my colleague, Lacey Champion, who rolled it out in 2016. She's the one that created a listening tour and spent time in the community before we ever started running TDM programs, just to listen to what the community needed. And when I came onto the project in 2017, I just copied what Angie and Lacey had already created. And I can't emphasize enough how important this listening component is. I recognize that CDOT could have taken a portion of our funding and pumped it into downtown Denver to help reduce the commute for accountants and computer engineers that tend to drive alone. But I think it's really important to recognize the ask that Angie made of the decision makers for Central 70. You know, I wasn't really privy to those conversations, but she left with a project where we could start to incentivize programs like carpool formation. And out of those conversations, we had a champion from CDOT, that was Rebecca White. And so a shout out to Rebecca White on this call. And I'll proceed with the rest of the presentation. But when I started the listening tour in 2018, some of the things that we were interested in were, what were the businesses worried about with this construction project? And a couple of things that we learned from them was that, and I'll just kind of back up a little bit, some of our businesses were basically sort of that non-traditional sector that Dave had mentioned. We had manufacturing and construction, trucking, distribution, agricultural processing. We even have a pretty big representative of Colorado's cannabis industry located within this zone. And there's a bit of retail kind of mixed in with this. What we were hearing from them was that they didn't feel like they were getting enough information from CDOT. And so that was one of the things that we really worked on to make sure that they understood what was happening. They felt like they were isolated. They were being cut off from their from their customers and their community based. They were worried about losing workers. And there were worries about loss of competitiveness, of not having enough employees actually to pursue job bids. And they were worried that their employees were just not going to make it into work or being delayed. And so it's really in this context that we started to roll out programming. And I just want to talk a little bit about the programming. Some of the programs that we worked on with those employers were basically developing a free transit pass for their employees, or a heavily subsidized transit pass or daily tickets for the RTD system in Denver. They also had interest in having like a commuter shuttle, something that would connect that last mile from the A line to the place of work. And you can see a cutaway van in this image. Later on in the project, we were actually given a cutaway van to operate. There's kind of a blessing and curse with having a vehicle like this. It's incredibly expensive to run. But CDOT did actually help fund this, but that's and became very difficult to continue especially once we got into the pandemic. And I'll continue here. So really the next step was trying to gain trust for the employees. One thing that I recognized immediately was if you have a good relationship with management, you'll also typically have a good relationship with their employees. That trust with management percolates down and folks tend to trust you. We discovered that a lot of our programs didn't work right off the bat. And part of the learning experience that I went through was keep the conversation open. Ask questions, why aren't you utilizing this service? And be prepared for, kind of some hardcore answers as to why things aren't working. But be prepared for language differences too. So a lot of the community in this particular area is monolingual Spanish. And a couple of things that I do speak Spanish. My Spanish is not from the local community. It's from a different part of the world. We were promoting our last mile shuttle, and the choice of word that I used to translate shuttle for them indicated that we were providing like a space shuttle service. And I just throw that out there as kind of we confused a lot of folks, what they thought they were getting a space shuttle ride from the A-line station to their place of work. But it also points out the need to really to hire from the local community. We started after that incident using local translators to translate our documents, local interpreters to work with us as well. It's also really important to pay those people for their expertise. I think this goes a long way to building trust with the community at large. But in addition to some of the other language problems we ran into, we had a large group of refugee workers in this particular location. Many of them were from Southeast Asia, Korean speakers, Burmese speakers. We spent a lot of money translating all of our literature into their language, only to discover that many of them were not literate in their language. And so I think there are ways around this. One of the best ways that we found was to actually translate those documents and make available an MP3 or a CD that they could just take with them that explained the details of that literature. And we worked with an interpreter that was a Korean speaker, that was a Burmese speaker. And another thing that I want to mention regarding that, make sure that your interpreters can truly explain to you what your programming is trying to do. There was a situation where we had an interpreter, a Korean speaker, show up late, and the Korean speakers there were waiting for us to actually show up and present to them. And so without really having much of a conversation with our interpreter, we went into the meeting and she was just interpreting word for word what I was saying. But words like carpool don't always translate easily. And again, we ended up with another room full of very confused people. And that was the last time that happened. It was a good learning experience, but from that point forward, when we met with other groups, I made sure that I had time to actually ask questions of the interpreter to make sure that I understood, that she understood what we were trying to do. Beyond those language differences, be prepared for cultural differences as well. One of the first incentivized carpool programs that we ran was a program really to incentivize drivers to fill their vehicles. We were paying $20 per seat per month to drivers that could actually help get people back and forth from work. And we really didn't have any takers in the very beginning. It was hard to really get this off the ground. But one day I had an older Latina woman come up, and she was explaining to me in Spanish that it had just taken time for her to work out the logistics with her family. She needed permission from her husband to actually make this happen. It's something that I hadn't really ever anticipated. But we formed a carpool of 4 people, and more started forming after that. Once one formed, additional carpools started to form. So you really have to just kind of take a step back and let things work themselves out on their own. And I know my time is short here, but as we started to mature in 2019, all the way through 2020 and the pandemic, we started working with some of our local partners. And I just want to mention one in general. That was Focus Point's Family Resource Center. Our goal and their goal was to try to develop a local hire program. And so the logic for this from a transportation perspective is if the businesses are hiring from the local residents, the transportation problems are much easier to solve. Rather than trying to figure out transportation clear across the metro area in Denver, we were just trying to concentrate in our local area. And we actually had some success with this. I should mention that Focus Points had a really robust local work hire program going on. They were kind of instrumental in this Work Now program that the Central 70 project had instituted. A lot of our employers knew about the Work Now program and were eager to participate as well. So in 2019, we started having hiring fairs. at their location. And what was great about that is, NETC had developed these really good relationships with the employers. And we were the ones who were able to bring them in to hire locally. So we had people or organizations like UPS, Geotech, which is a high-tech company in the neighborhood, one of the few high-tech companies, Purina, Native Roots, which was a cannabis company, Winter Session, which is a company that produces backpacks, Safeway Distributions, they joined us, as well as Caterpillar. And I'm happy to say that out of this, we hired, or we didn't hire, these local companies were able to hire from the local community. Native Roots, for instance, hired manicurists for trimming bud. They were hiring managerial trainees, horticulturalists from the community. That's something else that Focus Points had worked on, developing people who could actually grow for the community, vegetables, that sort of thing. So it was a really good fit with Native Roots. Geotech had developed a paid internship for their high school for a local high school, and hired and trained drone operators for their business. And UPS has continued to be a local source of employment for the community. Finally, I just want to mention that the last I heard, and this was about 6 months ago, the Latina carpools that we formed have continued to persist past the incentive program that we ran and past the pandemic. Now I'd like to go ahead and pass this on to Samantha Huff. Samantha?
Thanks so much. And I'll have Korea share her screen so she can get our slides up.
I'll just sneak in and just let everyone know too that if you have questions, make sure to use the Q&A function. And if you've already put the questions in the chat, I'll make sure to put a pin in them. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Korea. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Samantha Huff, and I'm a marketing manager at Foursquare ITP.
And my name is Korea Johnston. I am a senior marketing specialist with Clark Concepts based in Rockville, Maryland.
And together, Foursquare ITP and Clark Concepts developed and executed this affordable transportation marketing campaign for our client DDOT as a part of their Go DC Go initiative.
So just a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. I will be giving you a campaign introduction, and we'll also go over how we identified and reached our target audience for the campaign and how we overcame some of the communication barriers. So as far as goals, we had three main priorities. The first was to raise awareness around the existing affordable transportation programs among income eligible residents, to increase enrollment in existing affordable transportation programs, and to also eliminate barriers to multimodal travel in underserved and underrepresented neighborhoods. So one of the first issues we identified was that none of the program information was centralized. Each of the affordable transportation programs and their information were hosted on a different website, making them difficult to find. So we created the Commute Savings Ahead landing page with a portion of the screenshot here, hosted by GoDCGo, that would pull all of this information together and make it easy to navigate. From here, users could quickly identify the program they were interested in, find out if they met the eligibility criteria and how they could sign up. So in the screenshot you see here, as I mentioned, it's just a small part of the page, but pretty much the bread and butter. It highlights the different programs that we have available in DC. Capital Bike Share, which is our shared bike program, dockless scooters, Revel mopeds, Lyft for rideshare, carpool, the Metro system, and DC Circulator, which is one of our local bus systems. And from here, I'll pass it back to Sam to discuss our target audience.
Thanks, Kriya. So our next step in this campaign was to identify our target audience, which would consist of individuals and families that met the eligibility criteria. So criteria did vary between programs, but the main qualifiers were typically being unemployed, having an income under $25,000, or receiving government benefits. So as a team, GoDCGo has never directly targeted this audience before. So we had to stop and think, where can we reach this audience and what communities are they a part of? So we came up with this list you see on the right. We thought that the audience would be living in affordable housing developments or unhoused. They'd be in neighborhoods that had high poverty levels, and they'd be in communication with agencies that distributed government benefits, like the Department of Human Services. And lastly, their children would be attending public schools. You go to the next slide. Okay, and now I'll just go into a little bit more detail about how we reached each of those communities. So for the affordable housing developments and unhoused neighbors. So with help from GoDCGo's residential outreach coordinator, we were able to connect with affordable housing development and sent them posters to hang up in their hallways. These posters prompted users to text a number to receive more information, which would direct them to the Commute Savings Ahead page. And on the left there, you can see an example of that poster and what it looked like. We also worked with DC Mutual Aid to get the word out to people who were unhoused. The Capital Bike Share Community Partners Program was one of the few programs we were promoting that didn't require a government ID or internet access to sign up. And since those can be really large barriers to entry for the unhoused community, we decided only to promote the Community Partners Program to them. And with the help of DC Mutual Aid, we distributed flyers with the locations of the community partners that provided services to the unhoused community and could sign them up for these programs. So it was really important for us to partner with an organization that already worked in this community and had established trust, rather than just send our outreach specialists in who hadn't developed that trust and really wouldn't know exactly where these communities were or how to connect. So that was really important to us. And you can see the flyer we used on the right of the screen. The middle section is the front of the flyer, and the back of the flyer had the actual addresses, since the unhoused communities might not be likely to be able to reach them online or via phone. So we had addresses for them. Okay, moving on to low-income neighborhoods. So first, we used public data to identify the neighborhoods and the zip codes that had the lowest incomes and highest poverty rates in the district. From there, we ran social media ads targeted to these areas, and they ended up performing really well. But offline as well, in these neighborhoods, we had promotions on Capital Bike Share station panels, which you can see an example of that on the right of the screen, and WMATA bus shelters as well. We also ran newspaper ads in local publications like East of the River, and you can see an example of our newspaper ad on the left of the screen, and below it, one of our social media ads. Okay, we also worked with the Department of Human Services to send push notifications about Capital Bike Share for All, which was the DC's discounted bike share program, to users of their District Direct app. And that app is a mobile app for people receiving public benefits. And we also worked with the Department of Employment Services to get information out about these programs to those that were applying for unemployment benefits and needed transportation to get to and from interviews and job training. We provided information and education on these programs to the leaders at the DOES Job Center and are working on sending them over a packet of materials, including things like the table tent, which you see to the right of the slide. And again, that all directs to our text number, since that would be an easier way to collect information about the programs. And lastly, our next audience is public schools. So with the help from GoDC Go's school outreach coordinator, we were able to promote these programs to Title I schools in the district through email promotion and direct outreach. We prepared content to be included in the school's newsletters and provided flyers that could be sent home with students to their parents. We also got the word out through OSSE, which is the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, and the DC Public Charter Board newsletters. And with that, I will pass it on to Korea to cover how we overcame some communication barriers.
Thanks, Sam. So there we go. So getting into communication aspect, it was important for us to make sure that our communications were inclusive. So we made sure to utilize translations so that ESL residents could easily understand our communication materials. And in all of our communications, we strive to have our content be around a 7th grade reading level to reduce barriers and get the point across more easily. We also wanted to make sure that when we did use images, they were representative of the community. For instance, if it was a photo of a DC neighborhood, we wanted the background to be representative of a low-income neighborhood as opposed to, say, like a stretch of luxury DC apartments. We also wanted to make sure the demographics in our audience, demographics in our photos match those communities as well. So to the right here, you just see an example of one of our flyers that were translated into Spanish because we do have a large Spanish speaking population here. And while we didn't come across too many barriers, one of them was internet access. So although we tried to make our communication as inclusive and seamless as possible, there was still that major barrier of the lack of internet access. So a good amount of the communities we were trying to reach didn't have this capability. Although our materials were in print and utilized texting capabilities, they would still need to get the information for each program off of our hosted website. And only 2 of the 6 main programs we were promoting had in-person sign-up options. So we got in touch with local libraries to inform them of our campaign and these programs so that they could help people who came in trying to sign up. We also held on-site outreach events to sign people up on the spot for Capital Bike Share for All, which is one of the most popular affordable transportation options. We worked with the Department of Employment Services Job Center to educate them on these programs so they could also then sign up the unemployed individuals they were working with on a daily basis. And since these were third-party programs that required internet access for sign up, unfortunately, there was only so much we could do to eliminate that barrier. And just to the right here is an example of one of the mobile text messages we would send to mobile phones for those that did opt in for that option. So despite the internet barrier, we still did garner some great results for the campaign. Over 300 people were texted to receive more info. Almost 2,000 people viewed our Commute Savings Ahead landing page. Over 2,000 people interacted with us on social media. 289 people took steps to sign up for 1 or more programs, and 5 charities and government agencies committed to distributing our resources year-round. And here we just have our contact information, Samantha with Foursquare and myself with Clark Concepts. Should you guys have any additional questions that we don't have time to answer at the end. And thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you both. And lastly, we'll go to Monica Mallon.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Monica Mallon, and I live in Santa Clara County. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experience working in TDM and doing community engagement and some of the lessons that I've learned, at least so far. So just for a little bit of background on me, I recently graduated from San Jose State, but I've lived in the Bay Area since I was less than a year old and been taking transit for as long as I can remember. My parents and my aunt were always taking us on Caltrain and BTA and Samtrans and Muni and BART, when I was really young. So it's really something that I've grown up with. And, when I was a kid, my parents were busy with work, so transit was really the way that my brother and I would be able to go see our friends, in other parts of the Bay Area, or just go on transit trips. I know that maybe this isn't something that's very common now, and parents are a little bit nervous about their parents going on adventures alone, but back then, we would be going on all kinds of different adventures to see the Bay Area. And then as I got older and went to college at SJSU, I continued to rely on transit as more of a way to save money and, avoid debt. And, it was just a convenient way for me to get to school from where I lived in Cambrian, which is an unincorporated pocket down south. Early on in my college career, major changes were being proposed at BTA, which is the local transit agency in my area. And, those changes would have eliminated most of the bus lines in my neighborhood, and a lot of changes were also proposed that would have eliminated lines for the SJSU community, as a whole. And during that time, some of my neighbors and some members of the SJSU community helped me get involved in transit advocacy, and we were actually able to save some of those lines. So it's really an experience that showed me that, you can make a difference when you come together with other members of the community and speak up and, share your stories. And after that experience, I started to get more interested in getting involved in the transit and transportation world. And I really wanted to make a difference for students. So I decided to apply, to be a student assistant at Transportation Solutions, which is the TDM program at SJSU. And, they serve both students and employees at the university. And during my time there, we worked to get students and employees to take sustainable transportation to campus instead of driving alone. So that included, the bus system, light rail, regional rail, and also, biking and bike share and carpooling as well. And SJSU is kind of known as more of a commuter school. So there are a lot of commuters. There's also students living on campus, and just in general, there's students from a variety of backgrounds. There's students from different parts of the state that want to come here. There's students from different parts of the country, and even different parts of the world. So I was really able to hear a lot of different perspectives on transit and transportation in general. There's some people that grew up in really small towns where they didn't have transit at all, and they really didn't know very much about it. There's people like me that grew up here their entire lives, so they knew all the different agencies and already were familiar with the systems. And then there were people that kind of had negative opinions of transit and didn't think that it would work for them. So, I really was able to listen to all of those different stories and perspectives and try to figure out, what would work the best for people and help get them engaged in a meaningful way. And, sometimes for people that were a little bit more hesitant, it was kind of, just helping them give transit a try, or, give biking a try, or give carpooling a try, and, just kind of see what it was like, because we did provide a free transit pass on the local system. So it's kind of a situation where they could just give it a try one time, and if they didn't like it, they didn't have to keep doing it, and they could just go back to driving alone. But more often than not, they would, end up realizing that transit wasn't this scary, terrible thing, and they would continue to take it. And during my time there, we also were engaging students in transit advocacy at VTA and also regionally. We're especially involved in Bites to Save bus lines for students and members of the community. And we also advocated for a new service called the Rapid 568, which actually just launched earlier this month. There's some delays because of the pandemic, but it's a really important line that connects South County to San Jose State, which is kind of more in the middle of San Jose. And right now, or before this line was introduced, it took, sometimes hours for students to get up here, but with the new line, it's a lot faster and can get here with a lot less stops. And it's really been convenient for them so far, just in the past few weeks. And for all of the advocacy efforts, we engage with elected officials and agency staff and leadership at the university, and really tried to bring people together around a positive vision for transit in our county and in the region. Leading up to the pandemic, there was actually a lot of discussion about a regional transit funding measure. So that was something that we were starting to get engaged in and starting to see some progress on. But then, of course, the pandemic hit and everything changed overnight. I wasn't spending my days trying to get people on transit and advocating for, funding for better service. I was staying at home and, trying to figure out what to do and fighting for the survival of transit. And for me, especially locally, it was really terrifying because I live in a county of 2 million people about where there are no funded transit advocacy groups or any funded groups that really do a lot of local transit advocacy work. So it's kind of in a situation where it was kind of up to me to figure out how to save local transit for all of our students and for the broader community. And I had to do all of that on Zoom. Couldn't help, students stand up for themselves in real life and provide that real life guidance, which is something that, I really had relied on in the past. And, since transit was in such dire straits, it was easy to mobilize students and other members of the community, especially because at the time they didn't think the pandemic would last for as long as it did. And, they're expecting to go back to school a lot sooner. But what was really challenging was, helping people to use the new technology and to use Zoom, and especially for the public meetings, getting them to comment on the right items and raise their hands at the right time. If you're not used to Zoom meetings, when you just jump into one, you can't really necessarily tell what item they're on or where they are in the agenda or what's happening. And it was really confusing for a lot of the students. And at first I was just kind of trying to answer people's questions during the meeting, but it became really difficult. So I ended up, figuring out a new system using Action Network and campaign peer-to-peer texting that made it really easy for people to make their voices heard. They could just sign up and automatically get sent all of the information and get a text alert when the meeting had started and when the item that they were supposed to speak on had started, and we could provide them with updates during the meeting, and they're really able to make their voices heard in a way that was really powerful. And I think that it really ended up making a difference over time. And with transit advocacy, sometimes things will go well. Sometimes you're going to feel really heard. Sometimes the students that you're working with are going to feel really heard, but there's times where they will feel really ignored and really upset and really frustrated. And it's important to remember that transit advocacy is hard, and sometimes things don't go well, and figuring out what to say during those times to keep people engaged and to help them realize that this is a long process and a long battle and a long journey is really important. And kind of in the middle of all of that happening, there was a little bit of hope, and we had some polling come out that suggested that we might have the chance to pass a ballot measure to save Caltrain, which is a regional rail line in the Bay Area and a service that some of our students were using, and service that was very popular with commuters before the pandemic. But to get it on the ballot, we needed, I think, 7 entities to vote on it in a really short period of time. So I used what I'd learned from the ongoing campaign to prevent local transit cuts and worked with students and advocates, all over the Bay Area to get the measure on the ballot. And, then from there, once it was on the ballot, since it's a commuter rail system, the business community really stepped up and was helpful in, fundraising for the campaign and getting consultants, But what I found the most interesting about that campaign was that the messaging was barely about transit at all. It mainly focused on congestion relief and, science, which makes a lot of sense since most people in the Bay Area don't take transit. And a really big lesson from that for me was that you really need to fit the messaging to the audience. Not everybody is going to understand all the details about transit, and people that don't take transit, may not really resonate with messaging that's all about transit. And sometimes you do need to say that transit is about congestion relief. Transit is about, making it easier for people that don't take transit too. And while that ballot measure campaign was happening, we're still fighting to prevent the local VTA transit cuts. And at the time, they were considering up to a 30% transit cut, which would have been really devastating. The service would have ended at, I think, 10 p.m. on most lines, which really would have made it hard for a lot of people, especially, students that have jobs after work or are taking night classes. At San Jose State, we have classes that go pretty late into the night. So during that time, I really learned as much as possible about how transit cuts were prevented in the past in Santa Clara County. And, I talked with as many people as I could that were involved back then and worked with elected officials on solutions while also listening to their ideas. And, I ended up bringing together, some elected officials and union leadership and students and community members. And, we sat down for, I think, 3 or 4 hours, over the weekend and really talked about all the different options. And we ended up settling on a solution that involved front-loading transit operations funding so we could get the money that we needed up front to prevent transit cuts. This was a big risk, but at the time it was something that we felt like we needed to do. And, then from there, we really needed to talk about the framing and how we were going to frame this, because if you know anything about VTA and have seen anything about them in the press, the transit board members circle in and out a lot and don't always, know as much about transit as other transit board members at different agencies. And, one elected official suggested having people tell their stories about why transit matters to them. And that's something that I'd done in the past. And then the president of the transit union actually suggested talking about pass ups and riders being left behind, because we had social distancing in place on transit. A lot of transit riders were being left behind every day. And, that was something that he thought would be a really powerful message, which really ended up, working for us. And, we also focused on, how transit can help take cars off the road and help with traffic. We mostly talked about that in private meetings with board members beforehand, but that was really effective for some of them. And, ultimately, when we went to the big kind of board workshop about the cuts, our message resonated with most of the board members, and we were able to get the referral that we needed. And it was just a really powerful moment where everybody was able to come together and, really prioritize transit and think about taking a risk that would have really given us an opportunity to see transit thrive. But thankfully, in the end, more stimulus funding was passed, and our sales tax, which is the main funding source, recovered. And the agency decided to take the risk and prioritize full service restoration, knowing that we would need to secure more operations funding in the future. Now VTA is the first major bus agency in the Bay Area to restore service to 90%, and they have a plan to get to 100% by February next year. And, I think that is in part because of our advocacy and because we're pushing them on this so much, so consistently for so long. And, it's, the pandemic was really hard, but I've really been able to see the agency change and elected officials change and really start to prioritize transit, especially operations and especially transit for students and young people in underserved communities. And, now we have a really unique opportunity to get full service, but, we do urgently need state or federal operations funding or a regional or local ballot measure to really make sure that transit has the future that it really needs. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey and feel very lucky to be where we are now, but there are some key takeaways. And, the first and really the most important, is just to listen first, to listen to the people that you're trying to help and listen to the people that you want, help from. If you don't understand where someone's coming from, it's really hard to influence them. And it's also really hard to find common ground and a path forward. And the second is that it's important to speak up and help others, especially people that are underrepresented, and help them get the resources they need to make their voices heard. Sometimes that means hand-holding them and really guiding them through the process. Sometimes that means creating a system so that they can make Zoom public comments like I did. But ultimately, like, stories and hearing people's voices is something that can be really powerful for elected officials and agency staff. And the third thing is that it's really important to learn from your mistakes and continue to grow. It's okay to make mistakes. I definitely did, and we all do. But you should try to take the lessons from those experiences and actually change the way that you do things in the future. And really the last takeaway is that more support and funding for transit, especially operations, is really desperately needed. A lot of transit agencies in the country do have a bit of a runway thanks to the stimulus funding, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. We really want to create a positive future for transit. So that's everything that I had. And yeah, I guess pass it back to Casey for questions.
Thank you, Monica. I'll wrangle everyone back in, and thank you.
Go ahead, Dave.
For everyone participating in this afternoon's call. We do have some questions. We'll try to knock these out each by bit. Question for Ken, how would you recognize the structure of the carpools? How did you structure the carpools? Did you use an app, or did you use some kind of other program like Waze to get driver compensation?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a lot of the businesses that we were working with, we actually had to go back to square one. We were utilizing, paper matches, the recording of trips, for instance. Where we could, we were using Right Amigos. But for many of the folks that were involved with our project, we just had to use like a paper trail because they were not connected to the internet and they didn't have smartphone service. So a combination of both, really. And we would have loved to have used Waze, but couldn't do that.
Well, got it. Well, fair enough. Thank you. I'll pose this question to both Samantha and to Korea. Did you encounter, so first question, did you encounter any issues with engaging with agencies and groups to get the word out on the programs? And then the second question is, what funding sources did you use? Did you use CMAQ money, local funds, things of that nature?
Yeah, so that's a great question. First, yes and no, we did encounter some issues. Most people were really willing to work with us. Most agencies, everyone was like, this is a great idea. We want to get the word out. We want to help. But this really ran during the height of the pandemic, and these agencies were already so busy helping everyone. It was really, really hard to schedule time with them and schedule time to meet and show them about the programs and kind of do that education, getting them to incorporate it into their daily routine with their clients. So that was hard, but we just had to be really flexible of when to meet with them and keep following up and everything like that. And also for the funding question, I think, not exactly sure, but I'll try and answer this. Go DC Go itself has funding, and that's what we used for the marketing campaign. As for the programs, which it looks like you might be asking, these were all third-party programs, so we did not fund them, we did not run them, we were just promoting them. And for the one for training and interviews, that was actually a Lyft program called Lyft Up, and they're only in certain cities. So I'm not really sure where that funding comes from. I assume it's from our company, but hopefully I answered that question for you.
Got it. Thank you very much, Samantha. For Ken, in the past, Google Translate was perceived as quote unquote iffy for messaging and websites. Did you pay for translations or use Google Translate? If you did use Google Translate, has it gotten better over the last few years?
Yeah, we did actually start off using Google Translate, and then some of the skills of our staff were put to use. We, in the end, opted to pay folks to translate for us. The Spanish speakers, for instance, came from the local community. And we worked with, I believe it was the International Rescue Center for Translation and Interpretation Services for our refugee populations. And we did pay for that.
Got it. Thank you very much. Korea,
Wrapping it up, Dave.
Yeah. So the last question I want to send to Korea, what would be your one lesson learned from equity and inclusion in marketing and research?
I'd say that, not to go back to the slides, but I think one big lesson learned was the internet barrier. You just shouldn't assume that because you have something where it's so like universal that everyone has it, because that's definitely not the case. So yeah, big lesson learned. Not everyone has internet, so you definitely want to make things available, like if it's like on site or print ready versions and things like that, that's tangible for some people.
Right on. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining this afternoon for the call. Thank you very much for you visitors visiting us this afternoon. And on behalf of the DEI committee, I do want to thank all of you for participating and being a part of the family today. So thank you very much. And thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.